But thank you so much. This is an extraordinary panel, and this has been curated by an amazing woman leader, Megan CAMAISA. She's not only a community leader, but also the co-founder of CALIDI BIOTHERAPEUTIcs. And she not only pushes women on all areas to secure leadership position, but she is now actively working on some of the most important issues which she will talk about.
Yeah.
I'm super excited, and this panel is all about how women on top can lead the new era of equality. I think nothing can change if nothing changes on top. So I'm so excited for this final panel. So Megan, take on the panel.
Thank you so much, Rupa, and thank you all for being here. Let's just give Rupa a round of applause for an amazing day. We're gonna bring it home with this wonderful panel we have today. My name is Megan CAMAISA. I'm a co-founder of CALIDI BIOTHERAPEUTIcs. We're based in sunny San Diego, but I am so glad to be back home on the East Coast. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and one of our panelists is based out here in Boston, but I won't steal her thunder right now. But CALIDI is a biotechnology company that is looking to maybe cure cancer one day using fat stem cells and vaccinia virus. I'll leave it at that. And then also I'm in the federal government affairs space for the company. And so I also advocate, on different policies, gender equality, and different things. And this year it's very exciting because it's an election year, and there are so many issues on the table for women right now. And so I am also, full disclosure, part of the DNC's National Finance Committee. So I get to do a lot of very fun, exciting work on campaign. And there are some amazing female leaders representing the current Biden administration, the previous Obama administration and Clinton administrations, and our Dean of the NYU Professional Studies, who's been appointed to a few commissions by Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams. So I'm very excited to have this representation with a thread of government policy in here. So with that, I'll pass it down the line and let our distinguished panelists introduce themselves. It's going to be very interactive and fun. So I always like to have people introduce themselves and their career highlights and accomplishments and what's most important to you in your career.
Okay. I'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much to Rupa and to Megan for leading us. So my name is Angie KAMATH. I have the privilege of being the Dean of the NYU School of Professional Studies. We're about a medium-sized school within the nation's largest private university. And so we really take our stance in terms of being a leader in higher ed around access and equity quite seriously. What I would say and we'll get into it more in the panel, but I've had a career in the private sector, in nonprofits, in government, and now in higher education. And to me, leadership is very much kind of understanding the different styles that you have to take on in different places. And so what you need to be a leader in nonprofits or government looks really different than what you need to do in the private sector or in higher ed. And so it's been quite an interesting journey building different leadership muscles and understanding how to affect change. I'll talk about this later, but last year was quite a year in terms of class flips for female leaders in universities. So that's my teaser. And there's a lot to learn about what that looks like and kind of what we can collectively learn about leadership from the example of a lot of university presidents who navigated it well. I'd say in the case of NYU, and some who had different experiences. So thank you, and I appreciate being here today.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be here with you all, and thank you, Megan and Rupa, for having us. My name is YASMIN, YACOBY. I'm currently the Deputy Chief of Staff in the Office of Energy, Justice, and Equity at the Department of Energy. The work that my office does is specifically focused on ensuring an equitable energy future for all communities, specifically Black and Brown communities in the United States who have historically borne the brunt of the energy system and climate crisis. The work that I do has focused on energy and environmental justice my whole career. Before the Department of Energy, I was in the state of Rhode Island in their Office of Energy Resources, and I was their first ever energy justice lead for the state, doing work to try to figure out what this should look like for an entire state, and working to understand what communities have already established and what they said that they want, and bringing that into the government space. So I'm really excited to be here with you all and to hear from these amazing leaders with me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Irene Bueno. I'm the co-founder and partner at a government relations firm, originally called Nueva Vista Group. Now we go by NVG. One of the reasons we started the firm is that we wanted to make sure that voices that were not heard traditionally in Washington, D.C. were being heard at the White House, on Capitol Hill, at the agencies. So that's what we started over 21 years ago. We work with we do a lot of pro bono work with groups like the United Farm Workers. I do a lot in the Asian American community, with unions like SEIU, with National Breast Cancer Coalition, to Comcast, Pfizer. So we really have a different kind of clientele. But we're a woman-founded firm, and one of the reasons we founded it is that we realized that most of the firms in DC, the government relations firms, are run by men, and we were all young mothers, and we knew that if we wanted to have a life that was balanced, a life and career that was balanced, then we needed to start our own organization because we have a different way of getting our work done and trusting each other and knowing, even if I'm at home doing the work is getting done, and it's not about where I'm sitting down all day and that you can see me. But we can talk more about that later. So I'm happy to talk about kind of what I do in that space, traditionally a male-dominated space, and I'm kind of one of the first that look like me that is in that space. I can talk about that as well. But I'm originally from California. I went to UC Berkeley and Hastings Law School, so I did study to be a lawyer, but I decided that's not what I wanted to do. So I went to Washington, worked on Capitol Hill, and then served in the Clinton administration at one of the agencies and at the White House, and then started the firm. So that's my trajectory.
Wow, I learned a lot.
We know
We know each other for a while, like we're new things.
Yeah.
When I grew up, I wanted to be like Irene Bueno. Grace Choi. I'm based here in Brooklyn, from Atlanta, Georgia. My background is in 17 years of doing mostly Democratic politics and policymaking. So I first worked on President Obama's re-election campaign in 2012 on his inauguration. Then I met Irene when I served in his admin at the State Department. I was in the White House Liaison's office. Then I switched over to global women's issues. So this was soon after Secretary Hillary Clinton elevated the global women's agenda and made global women's issues an ambassadorship position and reported directly to the Secretary of State. So I joined under Secretary Kerry, and it was still elevated as a global ambassadorship role and office. And so I worked under Kathy Russell, who was the second Global Women's Issues Ambassador, and I was one of the policy advisors covering East Asia, social inclusion, which includes women and girls with disabilities, lesbian, bisexual, transgender women, as well as minority, religious and ethnic minority women and women and girls who are disabled. So just making sure that the voices that are on the margins are the ones that you need to make sure that are kind of prioritized in order to make sure that the full women's agenda is accomplished. So it's good to be back on foreign policy issues, but since leaving the Obama administration, I worked at Save the Children, advocating for women and girls issues in their policy team with Capitol Hill and the White House. It was under a Trump White House. We were advocating for women and girls issues, and it was a Republican-controlled House and Senate. Not to say Republicans can't support on women's issues, but it was really difficult to push forward some of the women and girls agenda. So I had an opportunity to move back home to my home state of Georgia and work for Stacey Abrams, who we had hoped would become the first Black woman governor in the country. But we did make a lot of strides in my home state of Georgia in 2018. I was her Asian American Outreach Director, mobilizing Asian American voters and increased the voter turnout for Asian Americans by 300% from the previous midterm election, which was great. And it was mostly women organizers doing that, by the way. But then after Stacey unfortunately lost, I moved back up to New York, and I've been here since. I work for Mayor de Blasio and the First Lady on mental health policy as a Director of Policy and Mental Health, Gender Equity, and Racial Justice through the height of COVID in New York City. I can go into this if you want later, but I took a 5-month break because my mental health was shot, and I was like, I need to take care of my life. And so I have encouraged sabbaticals. I took a 5-month self-paid sabbatical. I wish someone funded my sabbatical. Yes, please, people, let's get funding for a sabbatical so we can keep doing the work for the community. Then I reached out to a couple of mentors and friends. Andy Kim, who is now going to be our first Korean American senator from New Jersey, was my first client. Then Grace Meng, who is our fearless leader here in New York. Congressmember Grace Meng was his second client, and then Apex was my third client. So I have then, after my sabbatical, unintentionally started my own firm. It is focused on ensuring more Asian Americans are being elected at the local, state, and federal level, and also working with nonprofits to ensure that people in my community, our voices are represented and advocated in the White House and also on Capitol Hill. But that's me.
Awesome. Well, we'll dive right in because we again have a packed panel. So for each one of you, what institutional and societal changes need to be instituted for women to be empowered, and what have you seen? What are the big barriers that you're facing?
We're gonna mix it up. So
Yeah, mix it up.
Happy to go first. I think one of the largest systemic barriers that we see are the hidden barriers that just exist. Right, there are covert forms of oppression and then overt forms of oppression, and the covert forms are really the ones that we need to be battling. But I was having this conversation actually this weekend with my family about policies that are not really policies, but exist as kind of these unspoken policies that exist. The way that you dress, the way that you speak, the way that you show up to meetings, and the assumptions that are made about you based on all of those different kind of factors about your identity. Whether you are always available on Teams or whether you need to step away because you have other things in your life that you need to be taken care of. And I think until we can start to break down some of those assumptions and kind of unspoken policies, we're going to continue to exist in a space dominated by men, and specifically by cishet white men, and the kind of norms that they bring forward.
I'll jump in real quick. So I was having a great conversation this morning with a colleague around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just kind of talking about how the evolution has been so interesting in that, we had started, probably over 100 years ago, and we're probably in, at least from his summation, in about our 5th kind of wave of focus on DEI issues from, and now we're, past the making sure it's understood to kind of what does it look like in action. And so what I would share just to the notion of what's kind of systemic, what's institutionalized, is we went from a place where it was sort of like counting, where it was sort of like how many women are in leadership, how many women are in the pipeline, how many women are kind of on the fast track. And this work is just so much more complex. I mean, there are probably 100 metrics that we could really look at in terms of everything from kind of early stage pipeline programs to how many folks are being retained, to pipeline, to what are people doing? How are we promoting things like sabbaticals? And so I think what I would say is we have to make sure we're not taking a very simplistic, let's count the output type of mentality around this work, and really make sure that we are putting as well as we can name and data to the hidden and unhidden rules or opportunities that really are holding people back, and that should be celebrated. I think a big part when I think about things like venture capital for all female firms, it's 2%. It's depressing. It feels like way too high of a hill to climb. And then when you look at co-founders, men and women, it's more like 23-24% of those firms get funding. And so I think that the storytelling, the ability to understand and show momentum is really incredibly important. And I think that institutionally, we have to do that. So naming metrics more than the counting ones, making sure that we're not taking such a narrow view of progress and success in a way that almost makes progress seem unattainable.
I want to jump in on that. Do you think because society is so male-oriented and data is such a big thing to men, do you think it's almost shifted towards men to have that data to measure women?
I have an answer, but I'd be interested in
Yeah.
their take.
Well, you got it, because government needs data
Yeah.
to justify things.
Yeah. I guess I wasn't going to answer that question specifically because data could also be helpful to us too.
I'd love
So I think part of it, so I was talking about who makes those policies, and I kind of alluded to it about, like, in my firm, we knew that what we wanted to do, we couldn't do it elsewhere because the male-dominated firms would have their own kind of rules. And I always use a good example that, we were trying to recruit the best people to work for us, and there was a woman who was great, but she had 2 young kids, one had special needs, and she interviewed in a firm, and she said, I need to have flexibility because of my. And they said, oh yeah, we'll give you flexibility. And she said, I didn't believe them, right? So here they're telling her with one hand, but she knew that when she would go in that situation and say, I need to work from home today, that would be frowned upon or whatever. So she knew that when we said that she could trust us. So I think we need to change who makes those policies, and that's the way we did by creating our own firm. The other thing we do is make sure that people who are in those elected positions, that there are more women. So that's one of the things that we do, is trying to help more women to get elected, and people who are appointees, make sure that more women are in those positions. Being in the Clinton administration, which was, I don't know, people were born back in the 90s, but there were some women, but I feel like there was still a lot of men in those positions of power, maybe at the assistant secretary level that you didn't see. Some of them are still kind of hanging around in different positions. But I think that when we saw in Obama and with Biden that there was changes in who was in the secretary, deputy, chief of staff, really in those positions that make a difference, that that you could have more flexibility in the workplace as long as you're getting your work. You're not saying you're not doing your work, but I could get my work done. I could be the best in this job, but sometimes I might have to work from home today. So we need to change who the policymakers are. So not really a data question, but
on the data question, and then I want to hear from everybody else, but I think that it just depends on what part of the data we're using. I think that data is critical, because it helps justify, but it also helps us show what problems we need to be solving. However, what we often focus on in the classic bell curve is the average. And we need to be focusing on margins. And specifically, I can give an example of kind of why average doesn't exist. Back in World War II, women were starting to get drafted into being fighters and being in fighter jets. And all of the data showed that women were worse at being fighter pilots. And there was just kind of this misunderstanding, why were women worse? Well, the fighter jets were designed specifically for the average male. So they were for 6'1", broad-shouldered men. And so women couldn't reach the controls to fight. And so what we have now in our cars, all those adjustable seats were created during World War II for fighter planes. And once that change happened, women started excelling. They were doing just as well, if not better, than men. So we need to be looking at specific data. We need to be using data to our advantage, and we need to understand that data when we say data, people assume, it's, facts. It's the end all be all. But there's interpretation, and there's bias and ethics that happen behind data, behind artificial intelligence, behind it all.
Wonderful. Grace, anything to add?
I was just going to tell a story of when I was at the State Department and how actually I experienced a lot more misogyny with my counterparts from South Korea. I'm Korean American. And when I went to represent the US government as part of the State Department with the South Korean government officials, my counterpart was a man, and his secretary and assistant sitting next to him was a woman. He would never make eye contact with me during our entire bilateral meeting. He would be on his phone doing, I don't know what, maybe playing games, which I would love doing too during our meeting when he's ignoring me. And I'm much younger than him, maybe like 10, 15 years younger. And because I'm Asian, I don't raisin, and so I look even younger. So I just remember feeling so disrespected in that meeting, but I just kept going through my talking points and the policy objectives and trying to do what you're supposed to do as a US government official with your South Korean government counterpart. But it wasn't until the next day where we were at another reception or something, something switched, and I think he learned he had to work with me. So he became nicer and addressed me, and I was just like, okay. And the thing I learned, especially because I'm Korean American, I can speak a little Korean, was when you speak, especially for my homeland country, when you speak in Korean, you go straight into honorifics based on your age. So I intentionally spoke English because of the institutionalized patriarchy within the Korean language. Because as soon as I speak Korean, I have to say in Spanish, it would be like the usted versus the tu. And so I spoke English in order to make it more equal ground. So I think learning how to use language to your advantage can also help you deal with some of the institutional things that hold you back. So yes, I wanted to add that.
Yeah, wonderful. I want to go into the question of legal framework. Do we think that there are institutional legal frameworks that could better protect women, women's rights, women's leaders within the workplace, and doing a better job of getting more females in leadership?
I'll warm you up, guys. So in higher ed, we have Title IX, and we just celebrated its anniversary. I think it was last year. I think everything's a blur since COVID, but last year. And that has been incredible. And it's not the end game. It's not kind of where exactly we should be, but I think that's a really helpful example of a legal framework that both prioritizes women and then also makes space for others, right? And so I've heard the word margin a couple of times in this panel already. And one of my favorite books in higher ed is actually Leading from the Margins. And it's not a problem if you're in the margin. Actually, there's power to that. And there's power in understanding kind of what it's like to be on the outside, what it's like to be on the inside. And I think for me, Title IX is an interesting legal framework in that it really does, I think, prioritize women, but it also understands what it might be to not be a woman and be on the sidelines, and kind of the inclusivity that it requires, at least at a university, is really quite interesting. The other legal framework that I was thinking about, if that's my positive one, the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action is obviously not kind of gender specific, but really looking at race and the role of race in admissions. And so that's a legal framework that is extremely problematic. I would go so far as to say racist. And we have to really understand how intention of legal framework, how interpretation of legal framework, how you can fight against it. And I think for a place like NYU, what we said when we were expecting that decision to come down was, we still value diversity, and we're just going to have to pay for it. We're going to have to work for it a little bit harder, and we're still going to be able to absolutely show our values. And so that's, I think, some of the pieces that I think are important. So regardless of the legal framework, whether it's a good one or a positive one towards gender or one that is more problematic, I still think that there's room for interpretation. There's still room for advocacy. There's still room to kind of live the values and kind of show what's most important. And so that was at least the perspective I wanted to share.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Title IX, which I learned not too long ago that it was also the advocacy of Patsy Mink, who was the first woman of color and happens to be Asian American from Hawaii, who was the leader on Title IX, which is not well known. So now you know. I will also say, in addition to Title IX, that there's the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. New York State is working on passing a very robust ERA again. Through the legislature. We also have, on the international level, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and within that we want to make sure that all genders have equal access to thrive as human beings and have equal rights. We also know there are a lot of aspirational frameworks that may not necessarily be legal, but resolutions by the UN to support especially women who are victims of sexual violence. And so we have advocates like Amanda Wen, who is a nonprofit leader of RISE, and she has passed and worked with many heads of states in order to help survivors of sexual violence and sexual assault all around the world. And so I think these types of advocacy is very important, but I think legal frameworks are only as powerful as civil society brings accountability to the government and institutional bodies that are supposed to enforce it. And so I think when there's a robust civil society and nonprofit and advocacy grassroots group that is not only led by women, but also our allies. And so I love that there has been a lot of, in the past decade, especially of he for she, so male ambassadors for gender equity within their own men's space, and there's more nonprofits where men are realizing we have so much power, we need to also as men keep our own male counterparts accountable to make sure that we provide equitable access and rights to women as well. So I think if you see some of these countries that have great laws for childcare, for women's rights, if society actually doesn't allow for you to have access to the laws and to the benefits of laws for women and families, what's the point of it? So you want to make it living words and living laws, right? Rather than just words on a piece of paper. So I think civil society plays an important role in that.
No, I mean, I think just add to what everyone's saying, pay equity still continues to be an issue. And then if you're a woman of color, your equity is even worse. So I think, that's something, it's out there. There's not enough teeth in all these kinds of things. So enforcement's important. But I just always think about, even if we have the legal framework, EEOC or whatever, and just being that woman, bringing that up, you realize you could lose your job. There's a lot of, there's whistleblower protections.
Yes.
It's hard. There's got to be, like I said, maybe just changing how society looks at this, because it's hard for people to come forward and bring these big suits. So
So how are some effective ways that we can actually break down these barriers within leadership? Looking at all of these legal framework issues, what are some practical day-to-day applications and advice you guys can give to the audience for specifically breaking down these barriers and how you might go about it in your organizations?
Sure. So I can start. So this, we really, really believe in coaching within our world. And if I could sort of make a statement, I think every single woman needs a coach, really I'd say starting in middle school. But really every professional needs a coach. And I think for a long time, coaches were for athletes or coaches were for executives. And there's been this really exciting movement around kind of digital technology, around making coaching accessible, almost like an employee benefit. And so very much like telehealth, there are now companies, Bravely, Ezra, BetterUp, Coaching.com, where sort of like telehealth, where you can have access to 25,000 therapists or whatever. You can have access to thousands, tens of thousands of career coaches. That when you're just having a not great day, when you just had a meeting and you're like, what do I do? When something was not great in that meeting, or I felt like someone was a little bit passive aggressive, what do I do? Rather than going home and talking to a partner or a friend or brushing it off, more importantly, the idea of being able to kind of have someone who can just kind of have those corrections, work with those invisible rules that we will all trip up on and deal with it actively is something that I feel so passionately about. And I do think the more that we can start talking, normalizing what it looks like to have these issues in the workplace at least, the better off we'll be. I think the leadership and direct line that I make to leadership is to move up, you gotta stay in the game. And staying in the game should not be at the expense of your mental health. It shouldn't be at the expense of your family. It shouldn't be at the expense of your integrity. And I think that if we can start to normalize what it looks like to have a great career coach, in the same way that most CEOs have one, we can do a lot in the workplace realm. And certainly I think we're representing a lot of different perspectives and spheres, but I think that that's one that I would name for the workplace.
Do you think women are less likely to ask to have a coach because it's seen as being weak against their male counterparts?
And so this is, so possibly, and this is why, whether it's kind of pushing it in from just the employee assistance where it's completely private and confidential. And the beauty of these companies is that it's actually not really run out of HR. It really is an employee benefit, so it's completely confidential. Because they could and probably often get the coaching advice of, get the hell out of there. That is not a good or healthy workplace. They're like sort of paid as a benefit from the company, but they're not connected back. And I think the notion of everyone should have a coach makes it, again, kind of normalized, regardless of your position. And so it's very, I sound like an infomercial for digital. But really check it out. It's really inexpensive and really accessible.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I think it's an important one for folks to know about.
Yeah, I think that, to kind of add on to all of this, one of the main institutional barriers that exist are us. We are the institutions. And so there are obviously the men who promote some of these, whether consciously or unconsciously, but we have also had to climb and get to where we are using the same platforms and the same institutional kind of structures in order to get here. And we have to take a very critical look at whether we are continuing to uphold those structures. whether we are empowering the women who come behind us and the people who come behind us and who are in front of us, or whether we continue to kind of say the same things, uphold those hidden agendas and hidden policies that we otherwise wouldn't. I've seen it often, I experience it often, of just, again, women who are continuing to want to get ahead and therefore step on you or step on others, or people. It's not even just women, everybody is trying to get ahead, but we need to bring everybody together with us. We need to leave the doors open behind us, and we need to hold hands as we climb the ladder.
Great. No, I mean, I think I was just gonna say a similar thing. I mean, I would starting off when I yeah, like, you know, we just need to change kind of who's in power, right? So it's going to take time, but, you know, even my decades in Washington, I've seen it go from, you know, I just don't remember the percentage, but the number of women in Congress, especially in the Senate, was minuscule compared to what it is now. And I've definitely noticed a difference in the culture on Capitol Hill. You know, you still have, you know, stuff that goes on, but, you know, it's definitely changing as women get elected into positions, especially, you know, positions of power, like Speaker of the House. You know, that makes a difference. It changes, you know, the old boys network. Not saying it doesn't still exist, but as much as we continue to infiltrate it, and then when we get into those positions of power, not to continue those practices that have been holding us back.
All right, loaded question. How can we better empower men to be better allies and advocates for us? With some practical steps we can teach the guys here. You know, I'm a big fan of the Barbie movie. The ending monologue was epic. You know, we gotta love the Kens too. How do we get the guys there? Oh, wow. Okay. I know this was the loaded question of the day.
I think if you are looking to have children in the future, maybe bear more sons who are that you can shape. It's harder to change grown-up men. It is. It's hard to change me, grown-up woman, right? But if they're a baby and a child, it's easier to mold it into a more equitable person. That's a hard question, but I think it takes a lot of, honestly, like, I'm married to a very supportive husband, but he still doesn't get why I feel unsafe at night walking home alone from the subway. And he never will, because he's like, when I walk with you, you seem fine. I'm like, because you're a man, and men won't mess with me when I'm with another man. So I almost feel like, do you know how, like, this might be like really not PC, hopefully this is a little bit off the record, but Shallow Hal, you know, when like someone walked in someone else's shoes and experienced what it was like, maybe a man can also go be a woman for a day, like wear a women's suit or something. I know there are things, contraptions now where men can put on something so you can feel what it's like, not only pregnancy, but also the contractions and menstrual cramps. Maybe that would help.
Also deserves a clap.
I'm not sure, maybe just for, I don't know if a day's enough, maybe for a month. But I'm just thinking, like, I'm on my period right now. My husband has no idea what that feels like. Every month for a week, I have to deal with this, a fourth of my life, until I hit the time when I don't have to deal with it. And then you deal with other things like post-menopause. So it's just like, they literally have to be in our skins, I think. Or maybe in the future, AI will create a world where they can go into our universe and experience it, and maybe it'll open up their minds. I'm not an AI person, but maybe that's one of the pros of AI. I'm not sure.
Social media is starting to do some of that. I mean, there are questions, there's like this trend going on social media of, you know, like women asking their partners, like, or people asking, you know, women, would you rather be left alone in the woods with a bear or with a man? And women are often choosing the bear. And so there is, you know, and I think that's kind of opening the eyes for a lot of men of like, okay, there might be kind of, why would you feel unsafe? Why would you feel more safe with a bear than with a man in the woods? And so, but I think, you know, kind of to get back to the question of what we might be able to do, because I mean, well, that's part of it, is asking those questions and getting people and getting, you know, men to understand that there's something here that they're not seeing and they're not experiencing, and those microaggressions are going to continue to haunt us and exist in our lives forever, probably. But I think that when I'm starting to kind of have those conversations with the men in my life, often what I do is set some ground rules for discussion. And I say, hey, listen, you're going to be uncomfortable. But you know what? If you've ever experienced a growth spurt, discomfort happens in growth. And so you're going to grow from this. It's going to be uncomfortable, but bear with me. Keep an open mind, assume good intentions, but own your impact. And kind of just setting those rules so that we have something to go back to when there are disagreements or tension. And I can say, hey, I know that what you just said, I want to assume good intentions, but it had a negative impact and this is how it impacted me. And so really trying to just be open in conversation. The flip side of that is that it's not our jobs to educate. It's not our jobs to explain to people how we're struggling day in, day out. It's a really big burden to bear. But if we have the capacity, if we have the ability, and we can set some of those ground rules to be able to have robust and effective conversations, we might be able to move forward at least a little bit until the AI thing catches up.
Yeah, maybe soon.
Only quick thing that I'd add is, I think, I don't know, maybe it was 10, 20 years ago, the notion, the caricature of a woman being bossy or aggressive, right? Because of the book like Bossy Pants that came out, and that became just kind of, but people could then start talking about it and taking it apart and realizing that that's not fair. If a man did the same thing, it wouldn't have been called out. And so we got language around it. And so two things that I would say. One is a phrase that I've been using because my coach told me this, is kindness has an expiration date with some people. And so I do think that women, it's sort of like, we can make everyone feel, we have different communication. I think it's very true. We can be more collaborative, we can be more open, we can be more kind of calming in a lot of leadership environments. And then I think that sometimes that works for a lot of people, and other times it just is walked all over. And at a certain point, you're just not really taken as seriously because you're nice. And so the first piece is, I think, starting to give language to that, which kindness has an expiration date with some people. The moment in which it starts to undermine you, that's a problem. And so I feel like that's the next book to write. Another book to write around this is the notion of imposter syndrome. So where the hell did imposter syndrome come from? But it really hurts so many of us. And I really think it's a construct of, folks who've been in power, often the kind of cis white men. And so what I tell our students all the time, it's something that I didn't make up, but I heard from female founders, really successful, kick-ass female founders, and venture capitalists, was imposter syndrome literally is a superpower. Lean into it. You do not want to be the smart, arrogant person in the room. You want to be the person asking questions. You want to be the person thinking, maybe I don't know everything, because that makes you a curious, lifelong learner. And so the notion that and being able to, again, just say that out loud, like, who has imposter syndrome here in this room? Everyone should answer their question, right? To a bunch of wonderful, humble women who don't think we know it all. But really being able to just say that's actually the norm. That is the thing I would want to put up on a pedestal, not being the smartest person in the room, because that person's, quite frankly, usually a jerk. But really sort of saying, be the person asking questions, be the curious learner, and making that more of the norm, I think, is important. So just more anecdotes, but I feel like we're not going to solve this with one strategy, but there's a couple of things that we can start to normalize. I think that's important.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, I think everything has been said, but I think that kind of to your point, we're not responsible for educating them, but at the same time, especially if it's men that you care about, whether it's your spouse or brother or whatever, you have to let them know that what they said is not, and this is why. And at least, usually people are responsive to that. Like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that, and I'm not going to do it anymore. Now if they do it again, then that's, it's a whole other thing. But I think, calling it out and recognizing it and just like, this is wrong because,
And also owning that other people can educate themselves. If you tell them, hey, that hurt, and they're like, oh, well, tell me more, explain everything and why what I did hurt you. You absolutely have the right to say, I don't have the capacity to do that right now. There are resources online that you can go look at.
Or you can wear a t-shirt that says, you must be exhausted watching me do everything, which is what I wear. A friend got it for me. It's kind of perfect. That's a silent way to do it as well.
I think this is kind of going back to a previous question, but I think it's touching on all of this as well, is that in order to address some of the institutional barriers that exist, we have to use an approach called targeted universalism, which ensures that we are solving a universal problem with a targeted approach. And so specifically, I want to call out the intersectional dimensions of gender and of identity, and recognizing that in order for us to solve and begin to address some of these problems, we have to look at the most marginalized groups that exist in every single space. Black women, trans Black women, like, we need to uplift their voices, we need to understand the struggles that they face, and when we can bring those up, we are going to help so many women forward in general. So just, I want to really put a pin on that intersectional identity dimension.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'm the proud mom of biracial boys, 3 of them. So this question was a loaded one, and I appreciate everybody's input on that. I want to go to a question of how you guys all had any specific moments in your careers where you really enabled the empowerment of another female and led them to a leadership position, and why was it so fulfilling for you? Why was maybe the full circle moment from yourselves being leaders?
Yeah, anyone?
Go
first. Go ahead. Okay. So just really, I have love. So there are things that I do well and things I don't do well. Spotting young talent and promoting them is something I do well. I am a disaster when it comes to giving and managing folks who are not performers, who are lazy, the worst. So just to say, I'm not going to put myself out there as like the world's best manager, but I'm really good at spotting young talent. And so I've just had the real joy a couple of times. Kelly, I'll not use her last name, she was someone who came to me as an intern, and she was just wicked smart, great at finance, and being able to promote her 2 times. I left my organization, she followed me, and when she followed me to this nonprofit, it was from government, we went to a nonprofit, I really, really wanted her to come and work, and I said, what would it take, compensation-wise? And she gave me an outrageous number that I fell off my chair with. It was like 3 times what she was earning. It was going to be pretty close to me, and I was the executive director. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And that felt really good because it was just one of those moments where I was like, she just negotiated really well. She knows what I make. I know what she made. We've been with each other. And she wasn't playing, she was sort of playing the game, but like she was playing it really damn well. So it's like, well, you know what? We're going to do this because I think that we know, which is that first negotiation, that first salary, it grounds you, it anchors you. In nonprofits, you get paltry increases just because that's not why you're necessarily joining that type of environment. So that was a moment that was awesome. Well, fast forward 5 years later, she literally retired early at age 38. She's one of those, when I said wicked smart, she was like day trading when she was working this nonprofit. She had some income and she retired early. FIRE, the
financially independent retirement.
Yeah, so she's enjoying her life in rural Michigan, killing it, but it made me really happy to think about that. And I think there's a couple lessons there of like, own your destiny, figure out how to plan for it. Now I can go back to understanding why she negotiated and said she needed that number. She really needed that number. But she had a really good plan. And so like there's so many lessons to be in telling what she did.
Great.
I know. That was amazing. In a previous role, I was managing a couple of interns, and in an entirely white organization, they were 2 Black women, and they, were wanting to do energy justice work. They were really passionate. They were grounded in community. They were in doing either an undergrad or a grad program, and then George Floyd was murdered, and my office handled it incredibly poorly. We had one of our senior leaders come on Teams or Zoom or whatever it was and say, such a shame, but why did they have to loot? And both my interns came to me afterwards, faces fallen, and we had a very long conversation. And one of them was like, I want to send an email. And I said, do it. And she sent an email that got a very negative response from across the entire organization of people saying, this was an inappropriate email for her to send to the leader with everybody CC'd. And I said, no, she needed to be heard. She needed to say what she had to say. And they continued to talk to me, and eventually both of them said, we need to quit. And I said, I support you in that, 100%. I mean, there was a lot of work left to do, and that's okay. But they needed to get out because it was an unsafe and unhealthy environment for them. And so it's not necessarily empowering them to the top, but it is empowering them to be safe and be healthy and make sure that they are continuing to take care of themselves in environments that were simply not ready for them. And it's a shame that they weren't ready for them. That was work that I took on for the rest of that year. We did an undoing racism training. We did a lot of work, and eventually I learned that I also wasn't gonna stay in that space, that it was also not good for me, that I couldn't, make enough of a change. And so I left, but anyway, I think that there are ways to also continue to empower people, whether it's to the top or out in situations that are bad.
Yeah, I think as a mentor, a lot of times what you can do for mentees is to teach them how to have wisdom and discernment on whether they should stay or leave. And I've actually mentored some of the, not just women, but also young men of color who I wanted to protect them from toxic work environments and just told them don't go work there unless the leadership changes, because it's going to be really bad for your mental health and for your professional career. So I think that kind of like teaching young people also how to know like when do you need to leave, and that so HR isn't always on your side. HR is really protecting the organization. So sometimes you have to get your own legal counsel, but for just wisdom and knowing how to navigate. I'm not saying everything needs to be escalated and like you need to just quit on everything, but just knowing that if it's not just you, but multiple people experiencing the same abuse, emotional abuse, and kind of toxic work environment, to also give them wisdom. I wish someone had told me, you need to avoid this person and this organization because it's really going to be bad for your mental health. And I think that's how you protect people too, especially younger people, and then guide them. This is a great organization and a great leader that you can work for that will promote, support, and give you what you need. So I think that kind of guidance is really important. And so I try to do that through my one-on-one mentorship. And honestly, like, I won't go into it because it's too traumatic. So I still need to go see a therapist and continue working through the trauma I've experienced in toxic work environments by women, toxic women leadership. I'm not proud of it, but I'm just saying there's a lot there. But I think my point is that when I started off my firm and I started to hire my first ops associate, my first consultant, my first tranches of interns, I was like, what can I put in my mission and value statement, and how can I lead as a leader that is totally opposite from the traumatic work environment that I came from? And then I also told my staff and interns, you need to hold me accountable. So if you start seeing me act out and be squirrely and just like a bad leader, I know there's a power dynamic that's not fair, but I want people to give me feedback. And so we do like ask for feedback at the end of every internship or fellowship that people do with me in the last almost 3 years now. And I think that's helped me become a better leader. And I don't know, we all need to learn how to become better people because we're all flawed too. So
And I was just gonna say, sort of a little bit from the previous answer about toxic people, that I was telling someone right before we came in here about coaches or mentors, that seek out different ones, because there was someone who was a mentor when I first moved to Washington, and then I realized more about her and her style and how she treated people, and I realized I don't want that. I'm just successful, but I don't want to be like her. So don't assume like whoever, just because this person is successful, like that's the trajectory that you want to go and you want to follow her. Seek out other mentors, coaches, and just different styles, and then figure out for yourself, what works for you. And just a little bit of imposter syndrome, but at least it's authentic to you what kind of leader you are. Like, okay, you could be the person who's always speaking up in the meeting, or you can be that really good listener in the meeting and like can synthesize what everyone has said and come up with great ideas at the end. What makes sense for you, and there are different ways, and there's just not one way. So whenever I meet people, I mentor a lot of or I don't know what you call it.
You do mentor.
Yeah, I mentor a lot of people. Sometimes it's very general, but then I try to ask specifically, like, what do you want to do long term? Like, what's important to you? And I think that's the way I can try to help people. There's someone in my firm who, a little bit to your point, she keeps asking for more money, but she is so good that we're so afraid to lose her. But then we have to keep everyone on par. So we're raising hers, but she does scare us. Good
Good for her.
And I mean, this is something I'm always so proud of that, firm's been around for 21 years, that the only people who've left us are very junior people, and we'll hire very junior people and we tell them, we want you to leave in 2 years. Do not stay here. We don't want you to become, you need to go to the Hill, to the administration, get some real experience. But so people who are above that level have never left us unless like their family moved across country because of their husband had another job. But so for that, people have been with us for 16, 18 years. And I think that means that we have a really good place where people can express how they're feeling if they don't like something. I don't love everybody, but I have grace, like, this is who she is, and when she talks to me like this, it's coming from the heart.
It's real.
She's always just anxious about stuff, like, she's worried about everything. Like, she's just a worrier. It's good, we need a worrier, we need somebody who's not as worried as me. Like, we need all kinds of people, and I give her grace, and she's wonderful, but we have to accept that people are different.
Yes.
And just, embrace that a lot. It's always about being mean.
Yeah, that's true. I love that.
So everybody here is really phenomenal. How have you all developed courage and resiliency throughout your career paths? Because it's taken you guys a long while to develop yourselves professionally. So share some strategies.
This is straight from Brene Brown. Just show your vulnerabilities. So when you I think the number one thing for leadership is, for me, is when you make a mistake, just say it out loud. And when we have success, say it out loud and then move on. But I think there's nothing from an authenticity perspective that beats. We're all gonna mess up, whether it's big or small, and just own it, talk about it. It will free up other people's minds to be more honest and transparent as well. And I didn't always do that. I was the young upstart, I'm gonna get everything right and put my office hour time in, and that kind of just overworks you, and I'm not sure it really matters, and it can backfire very much with colleagues.
First of all, therapy. Go to therapy. Everybody needs therapy, and it's the best. I think that it took a while to kind of recognize that I am worthy regardless of what I do and what I produce. I have inherent self-worth, both inside the workspace and outside of it. I don't have to burn myself out in order to be successful. And in fact, setting boundaries is going to make me more effective in order to actually get to where I want to go. And then celebrate the small wins. I think that's something that it took me a really long time to start recognizing, but I was realizing just how much I was burning out all the time because I am trying to change the world. And I want it to happen now. And I was just talking to my friend who I ran into. She's here, and I'm so happy that she's here. But we were talking about how trying to make systemic change is like turning a cruise ship in a very narrow channel. It's gonna, be a tick forward and then 3 ticks back and then another tick forward, and then, you actually get stuck and you have to figure out how to get unstuck. And all of that kind of goes to show though, that the ticks forward are progress, and they're a small win, and the ticks backward are also something, they're learning opportunities. And so I actually keep a spreadsheet that I write in every single day of the date and 3 small wins that I managed to accomplish that day. That's it, just 3. And including like, hey, I submitted my timesheet on time. That's a win. I didn't do that last week, so that's great. And so like all of those little things. And then I also keep track of how the day went. I have those little, like, it's a rain cloud or a sunny sky or whatever it might be to just help me kind of, track like what's making me feel good, what's not making me feel good, how can I do more things that make me feel good and happy.
That's great. I know one of the things when I first started out, in high school, I was great. I could speak to the public, and then I messed up something, and people laughed at me. And after that, I was so afraid to speak up in public. And so one of the things I worked on, I did a fellowship called the Coro Foundation Fellowship. Everyone knows about that, but I did it after law school. I realized I didn't want to practice law. But so I shared that with the other fellows, and they said, okay, well then your thing is going to be, you're going to speak whenever you get an opportunity. So you always have to say yes and speak up, or accept an invitation to speak on a panel. So I did that a lot. At some point, I think I started burning out. So then the next thing I had to learn how to say no. So some of my colleagues, because I'm a pleaser, there's that too. I'm trying to make everybody happy. they gave me this little button that says no.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so learn to say no. And it's, for me, it's so uncomfortable. I just had it last week where I missed like the gala, I missed all these things, but my daughter's going to college and I had one more night with her, but I said, no, sorry, I'm gonna miss that. All those things that I normally do, but I'm gonna spend it with my daughter and watch TV and whatever. But so learn to say no, but know that it will feel really uncomfortable because you'll want to take care of people or whatever it is. But just knowing that and then just feeling it and then waking up the next day. And then, did you say like being thankful for, giving yourself some grace too, like, so you screwed up something, like, oh, I hate it. No, don't beat yourself up, just acknowledge it, and and just really just move on because there's a lot of good things in life, and focus on that. And I know it, friends, you need to have great friends, great support network. That is so important. Yeah, find your people. And we were talking to this law student, an NYU law student. I said, she just started, and she said, oh, I found some friends. I said, okay, you found your people. You're gonna be okay. So as soon as you found your people, then just find your people.
Yeah, no, that's good. I agree with finding your friends.
Yeah.
I think what else has made me very resilient, in addition to friends and family, whether it's your biological or chosen, because Lauren knows there's a lot of brokenness in this world, so family's not always the best place to go to for support, but sometimes it is. For me, I'm a person of faith, and I really rely on my faith a lot. I'm Christian, and I think working in the political space where there's always a winner and a loser on election day, whether it's a primary or a general, you don't know what's gonna happen next. And so what makes me resilient in this political space is my faith, knowing that the higher being will take care of me and things will work out. And I have my family and friends support, as well as my therapist to support me, and I have a spiritual advisor. But I think my faith has really grounded me through the tumultuous situations and seasons at City Hall working for the mayor, where I just wanted to quit every day. And I eventually did 2.5 years later. But my faith, God really saved me every day. I so did my family and friends. So I think that my faith has made me the resilient person I am. I'm actually grateful for all the toxic bosses in my life because it made me become a stronger version of who I would be. I'm not that strong, but I become a lot more resilient and stronger and tougher, and being able to survive in New York City with tough bosses. And so I thank them all, and I thank God.
Really good. So how can women work across the divides? It's UN week. Lots of people working across lots of divides this week, working on complex problems. And we know women are multitaskers and we like to get it done. So how do we work across the divides to get it done, especially in leadership? Go ahead.
I like starting this.
That's good. I know. She gave us a lot of questions.
I did.
I'm very
And so I remember looking at that one, and I'm not sure I really contemplate it. So working across the divide. I mean, I guess, I hate speaking cliches, but there is always a common ground, even if it's as simple as we both like pizza. There is a common ground for everyone. I think you have to sometimes work really hard to find it. And so, it's funny, my husband, he knows all my inner thoughts about people, and he's often like, you don't like anyone, do you? I like you. But he actually doesn't go to work events with me anymore because he's like, I actually can't stand you. He's like, I know what you think about that person, and when you're with them, it's the pretend. It's like the pretend you, and he's like, I know that you're doing what you need to do, and I know that that's actually kind of effective. You can't tell people what you really think, but he's like, that you makes me really uncomfortable, truly. And again, we had a lot of conversations over the years. We've been together for 25 years. I'm like, it's not fake. I don't believe, but it is finding a common ground. And again, there are very few people. I don't know that I've met anyone who's truly horrible or truly perfect. Everyone has a bit of both. I mean, some people are a little bit more on one side of the spectrum, sure, but I think that idea of finding common ground is super important. We spent a lot of time in this past year at NYU
And again, just doing the constructive dialogue and being, in civil society means you gotta be respectful, you gotta listen, you gotta be informed, you gotta get involved, you gotta be open to compromise, you have to be willing to listen, and you have to be willing to apologize. And so Richard Haas has written a great book called The Bill of Obligations, and it's essentially, the idea is that the flip side of enjoying the Bill of Rights means you have obligations, and obligations aren't just in the political context, it's about being really a member of any community. And so those are, I think, some of the ways that I think about the bridging, but it's so necessary. I don't have to tell this group or this panel involved in politics that we have to figure out how to be better bridgers.
Yes.
It's just, I literally think our democracy depends on it.
Yes.
I think that alongside kind of the common ground is framing. And part of that is finding common ground, right? You don't have to agree on every single thing. But there is framing that can be done in order to get a point across that is going to kind of have benefits that everybody can understand. So again, it's kind of like that data point of like what part of the data are you looking at? Right. Specifically in the energy sector, there are some people who are going to care a lot more about jobs or about like the economy than they do about saving the earth.
Right.
And so finding that framing, finding the way to say, hey, this is actually going to benefit the both of us for this reason that I know you will likely care about, or just finding out what that person might care about, finding out what whoever you're talking to cares about, and framing it in a way that makes them care. Because I think all of us are very moral people, and we kind of like to believe that we're doing things for moral reasons, and that's great. And some people might operate out of other prioritizations, and that's okay. And so, I think framing is.
I think in Washington, like those unusual coalitions where you have unusual people who are working together, and that people pay attention because they say, oh, well, why are all these groups who seem to have diverse interests working together? So that always gets attention. But I was thinking about how, like, I was talking about someone that I work with on some issues, don't like her leadership style, but at the same time, we have something that we work on together. So it's sort of, you don't have to compromise what you believe in, but okay, we have this common goal, and just kind of focus on that goal and sort of let the other things kind of go aside. But I was thinking more kind of broadly, like in the women in this room, like I haven't spoken to women like all of you in a long time. It's always like DC types of people. So I think just bringing us together, bringing us together more often in these opportunities, and look forward to meeting some of you. But I think just exposing all of us to all of you, and just learning more about what you do and what you're interested in, and how we can work all together.
One last thing I'll say is something that a NYU professor, you might know him, Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah, of course.
My husband is Jonathan Haidt's favorite person besides me, I think, in the world, and thinker. He mentioned him for 30 minutes on our first date. He does have a lot of good points.
He really is very good.
One of them being that in order to cross the divide, we need to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
And I think social media does not allow for our minds to be developed to be critical thinkers. We just go with whatever the flow is. And I think, there is a book Jonathan Haidt has written called Coddling of the American Mind. I haven't read it because it's hard for me to sit down and read, but my husband quotes it all the time. But essentially, we need to, ourselves and also the next generation of leaders on college campuses and high schools and middle schools, teach them how to have critical thinking skills so that they can go across the line and be accepting of diverse perspectives that are not their own. So I think,
I think wrap up question for everybody. How would you empower and grow a female leader, and what's the best piece of advice you have from them?
Why is it when you phrase these questions, they feel like such stumpers? Oh my goodness.
There's Miss America.
I'm not trying to trick anyone. I am not trying to trick anyone. I promise.
No, not at all. They're just such good questions. So I have a 16-year-old daughter, so my mind immediately goes to Soraya, and nothing builds will and resilience and patience and all sorts of man love than understanding a child who's really different from you and who makes really different decisions but has the same kind of grounding. And so when I think about just that relationship, and that relationship can go for anyone, it's like truly putting aside assumptions and hopes and dreams and stereotypes and biases, and just like really just listening. And so I think just the best thing that one can do is like to really listen. And so even we've talked a lot about mentoring and coaching, and I think sometimes in mentoring we give advice on like, what would you do? And like the answer should be like, you know, what do you want to do? Like, what are you looking to do? How can I be helpful to you? And so I just think that deep listening is something that you learn as a parent of teenagers, and it kind of goes, I think, for every relationship. And so encouraging deep listening in others is really important. Another infomercial, Peoplehood. It's a small firm, maybe not small, it's actually a pretty damn big firm here in New York, created by the former founders of SoulCycle. And their whole idea behind Peoplehood is getting people to understand SoulCycle wasn't about the cycling, it wasn't about fitness, it was around community and listening to one another. And so they founded this wellness company, and you can go there for a gather, you pay a little, I don't know, $20, $30, something like that, to be able to just come together and listen to people and learn how to be. And so I just think that that's important. And so check it out. Again, I am not on the I just think a lot about these things, and I think it's very air, particularly this past year, and just how to be a better human, how to like embrace difference and how to be more collaborative. So there's just a lot of tools out there.
That's great.
No, I mean, I guess I was thinking like, there's a question that's related to like, what can we do?
Right.
One thing is, just identifying someone, like, I might see someone who I could tell like maybe wants to talk to me or interested in, being her mentor or whatever. But just identifying that and reaching out to that person and just saying, starting a conversation with them. I think sometimes mentorships kind of are a little phony. So maybe it's more just, we're just talking and getting to know each other, and it evolves into that. But, there is someone that's out there who wants to talk to you, and just kind of being open to that. I think that's important. Because sometimes I don't think about like all the stuff that I've done, but I guess, I've been doing this for a while, so I guess I've learned something. I have something to impart on people. So I think that's something that we have that kind of responsibility. But just talking about your daughter, I don't know if she listens to anything I say, but just being there and trying not to be judgmental when she tells you something, and just being open-minded. So I think, us as being whatever leaders or mentors, listening to people, because it's easy for us to dispense our advice, but listening to who we're talking to, whether it's our daughter or someone that who's reached out to us because they want to tell us something. So really just listening.
I think, to echo both of those points, something that I often do is, if someone is talking to me about whatever it is, whether it's a family member or a colleague or whatever, asking, because I always want to just give advice. I always want to say, well, here's my solution. I need to tell you what I'm thinking. But asking, do you want advice, or do you want me to just listen and validate your experience? And I'm shocked by how often it's validated. But people really just want to be heard. And so to that point, asking that question often is I think really useful. But then to the question of just like, raising women up, kindness, showing a lot of kindness. We've all been through it, trying to get to where we are, continuing to try to get to where we want to go. And it's, we are often the harshest on ourselves. And so, showing kindness to other people, showing grace, really, singing their praises when praise is due, and even when it isn't, and just, supporting and lifting up, I think is going to continue to be super important.
I agree with everything said, and one last thing as we transition to a reception, I'm sure you guys go to so many receptions during ANGA and in your careers, is don't be a bagel, be a croissant. So when you're standing at a reception, don't close into the circle that you already know and create a bagel. Open it up so that you can allow someone into your fold and be a croissant. This is not my thinking. I took it from someone else, but I really believe be a croissant. Always. Always.
One question in the back. One question in the back. We have time? Yeah, go ahead.
I love you guys so much. I on these before. It's kind of the said before, like, my name is Frederick. I really want to have a contact with all of you guys. I am a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. And I am also a founder of a non-profit called SEPT Africa. I will give all of you my account.
Yeah.
So after working for the UN for 7 years, all over the world, we moved to California from France. So je parle français.
Yeah.
So I founded this non-profit, and this is what I've been doing. That is so effective. Implementation. Because when I was working for the UN, everything we are saying today, gender equality, pay, we have said so much about that. Now that I'm a founder in 15 countries, I'm not even using, like, my budget is like the shoestring, and I'm changing lives.
Yes.
Amazing.
I'm changing lives. So, like, putting a tribe. After school, children come to our academy. The girls are male, they wear the male thing.
Oh.
And then they sit down in the council. Little girls, 7 years, 6 years. And then I tell the boys, she is the male for 2 weeks, or for 1 week. You sit down, you do the assessment of needs in your neighborhood. Who take care of the garbage? Who take care of the water? Nobody's wrong, nobody's right, but you have to respect what she has to say because she's the mayor. Hey, mayor, you have to listen. You are not like saying what you say is no. You have to work together, right? So I am an in-house counsel right now at Google. I came here to listen all of you going all over, sharing my experience. Why don't we build the bridges from the north to the south?
Yes.
Because I saw you here, I didn't see anybody who looks like me, but before that there were people who looked like me, before this panel. So we can do together.
Yes.
We don't have to wait for men to do ABC. I have a son and a boy, and 2 girls. I told my son, Victor, you are in the middle to hold the hand of your sister. Do you want anybody to hurt your sister? No. So don't hurt anybody's sister.
Yeah.
Oh, mommy, I didn't think, the sister you want to hurt is the sister of somebody else.
Yeah.
So training boys start at home.
Yeah.
Before sending them to the teachers who know. We know our boys, right?
Yeah.
And then what I wanted to add at the end is, can we create a network? Really, even for 2 people where she said that she's writing every day, what she do every day.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do something every day. That can be maybe at NYU or wherever, because I have all these students working for SAYA from their dorm. I give them project working with, you work for Senegal from MIT. I work for a project, so I connect them to change them, and they love it. So I just wanted to say bravo for what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story. That's so inspiring. Thank you for lifting up the next generation of not only female leaders, but young, strong male leaders that respect women. Thank you. Right here, Time for.
I just have one question. I'm Susie Menteng, and I asked questions before. I'm the girl who always asks questions.
Great, yes.
I used to be the one in class who always like, teacher, I have a question. And my friend would laugh at me at the end of school. Okay, so I'm gonna take us back to the beginning of this whole conversation. I wanna talk about leadership. And the question I'm gonna ask today is gonna seem very funny to you, but it's not to me. I want to ask you why, any of you can answer, just one person. Why do you think that the American people are ready for a woman as a leader? I'm not saying that because of what's going on in the election, no. I'm saying that based on your own experience. Why do you think? No, I don't want to know if they are or not. What are the reasons you guys are thinking that the American people are ready to have a woman as a leader? Because I could tell you something, where I'm from, African people are not ready to have a woman as a leader. Okay? So are the American people ready to have women in leadership roles?
Well, as of today, the majority of people are ready to have the first ever female president elected to office. Kamala Harris is ahead in the polls as of today. We are 4 points ahead. And I can proudly say that the people of America are ready for change. They're ready for gender equality. One of the biggest issues is female reproductive health care. And I say female reproductive health care because it is a broad range of issues. No matter where you stand on abortion rights, we've got to look at it from a different perspective. There's also menopause that we have to think about. We have to look at miscarriages. You have to look at other women's equality issues and the issues for LGBTQ plus communities, BIPOC communities that are all wrapped up in the legislation. So I think that people are now the American people are starting to see the dangers that are wrapped around not having a female in leadership, and specifically in the office of the presidency of the United States. So I think the time is now. The time is now. If there's not been a time, the time is now. Anyone else? Oh, okay. One more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Wangari Wakia. I am I'm from Kenya, and I'm an economist running a firm called Expertise Global. We are running a project right now, which is one of the first projects that I've ever run of this kind. Typically, I deal with public finance and taxes and all that stuff with government, but we got a grant with a firm called Co-Impact to help us understand or enhance women leadership in the economic sector in Kenya, and the particular sector we chose was in commercial banking. So I'm starting to read up and starting to understand a little bit about what happens, what the constraints are, and I really love this conversation. I think you guys are an example of why you need women in leadership. Where if it was an all-men panel, I'm sorry, the men in the room, we would not be having this kind of like the thing that you talked about, kind of like the quote-unquote softer side, although sometimes the softer side is actually the hardest side, right? Of leadership and understanding that you can be very technically strong, but you bring another side to the conversation in leadership that is really important in how you lead people. So, in a lot of the literature, and going back to my question and where I'd like you to hear views, is that a lot of the literature shows, you need mentorship for ladies. You need flexible work environments. You need house, childcare in the households. And a lot of what you guys were talking about was how, and what I'm taking from it is that the work is a relay, right? You run up to where you can, and then you hand off to somebody else. For example, you said, the two ladies you're interning, they ran up to a certain point, and at some point they were like, have to leave, and then give it to somebody else to run the relay. So for us, I am thinking of it in those terms where in a lot of the global south, you have a lot of childcare. You have people at home who are helping you with your children. So even though that seems to be a big problem in a lot of the countries, in global south it may not be a preeminent problem. There may be some issues around cultural norms and women being in the household, but childcare is not a big issue. Things like lactation rooms, they exist in the workplaces, in many workplaces, at least in the commercial banks you're working in, but that it has only taken you so far. So in the spirit of a relay, what do you think we should start thinking about in terms of the next steps? There's policy, but sometimes implementation of policy is difficult. What's the next step from that standpoint in terms of having all those things in place? Where do we go from here? Thank you.
That's
great. I'm kind of like
that's great.
I can take a quick swing. This might be a very specific answer, but I started out my career in commercial banking at Citibank, and I also am part of Coral Leadership. And what is pretty similar in terms of this nonprofit organization, Coral Leadership, and what the program that I joined at Citibank is, I believe in rotational assignments. In terms of, to be a great banker, you need to understand operations, you need to understand the trading desk, you need to understand communications, et cetera. In Coral Leadership, we are the idea is medical residency. We're a doctor. Coral Leadership is to make change in the world, you have to understand government, nonprofit, education, media, and business, private sector perspectives. And as leaders, getting trained up in again, medical residencies, you need to have generalist skills, you kind of rotate through different areas to be able to then become a great doctor by specializing in something. And so I don't know if this is kind of directly answering your question, but as you were speaking, I just think this notion of understanding different perspectives, whether it's in the private sector and commercial banking, I think you could be a better leader if you understood and really figured it out. I mean, finance it's hard charging, people can burn out, people can stay for a long time, people kind of know their one point of view, but I think again, this coming at problems from different angles feels really important for any sector, but I think there's good precedent in the kind of private sector for that.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add to that, because I think that was really well said, is that I personally believe, as much as it pains me to believe it, that social issues don't have solutions, they only have improvements. And so there's always something that we can continue to strive for. We're not gonna know what it is right now until we have kind of gotten to a place where we're comfortable and then the next problem pops up or is able to be solved because we've solved the previous problem, or not solved, but improved on. And I think kind of on top of all of that is making sure that, again, the voices of the people who are most marginalized are in the room and able to participate in the conversation and bring some of their ideas forward. Most often, the people who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, and so making sure that they are in the room is really critical.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for joining not only this panel, but today our women, Rupa, and we'll give the mic back over to Rupa. Thank you.